Committee Food and Faith series. I'm Gary Lautenschlager, and I'm with College Lutheran Church in Salem. Our fall sessions will include an emphasis on how to be an effective advocate for the hungry. Our first program begins with Virginia Interfaith Power Light Co-Directors, Faith Harris and Kendyl Crawford, to discuss food injustices, the intersection of water, transportation, and food deserts. They will illustrate ways individuals can advocate in their local communities. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Phyllis Cox with Christ Lutheran in Stanton and Wheatland Lutheran in Buchanan to lead us in prayer, and special blessings to Phyllis as she's soon to be ordained deacon in October. Phyllis?
Thank you, Gary.
Let us pray. God of all nations, help us to be open to your will in our lives, so that we can learn and go forth refreshed. Amen.
Amen. I'm very excited to introduce our guest speakers from Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Faith is an assistant professor of theological studies with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. Faith teaches courses in the study of systematic eco-theology and womanist, feminist theologies, employing activism and community engagement in ministry. She is the director of the Johnson A. Edith Somwin Center for Faith, Leadership and Public Life, or STVU, which convenes workshops, panel discussions, town halls, among other events to facilitate deeper and meaningful student and community engagement and dialogue related to theology and public and civic policy. Faith has an earned Doctorate of Ministry degree and a Master of Divinity degree from Virginia Union University and a Master of Sacred Theology degree with an emphasis in practical theology, Christian social ethics, and ecclesiology from Boston University School of Theology. In addition to her academic and administrative work, Dr. Harris has been highly active in the Richmond community for more than 10 years. She is currently a member of the Standing Together Steering Committee of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and is a member of the Governor's Environmental Justice Advisory Council for Governor Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam. Kendyl is excited to be at the forefront of congregational organizing efforts taking place in Virginia around the issue of climate change, which has far-reaching justice and moral implications, as the director of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. As the former Richmond Conservation Program Coordinator for the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, Kendyl worked on community organizing around climate change and toxic pollution with faith communities around the state. She received a bachelor's degree in marine and environmental science from Hampton University in 2012, and has a Master of Science degree in Environment, Science, and Society from University College London, where she conducted research on social movement organizations mobilizing around air pollution in London on a Marshall Scholarship. In 2018, Kendyl received a Master's of Nonprofit Studies degree at the University of Richmond and was chosen to be the student commencement speaker representing her class. Kendyl currently serves on the board of the Virginia Conservation Network. So again, we welcome both Faith and Kendyl. We're very excited as they talk about being an effective advocate for the hungry. We ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the session, or you can add your question to the chat features and we'll forward that to the speakers. So again, welcome Faith and Kendyl.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Gary. I'm not going to murder your last name right now, but I'm really happy to be here. And I know we're really grateful that our colleagues were able to join us as well. And thank you, Phyllis, for the invitation. Phyllis is one of our newest staff members, and we're really excited that she thought it not robbery to spend time with us. She interned with us for an entire year and then still wanted to work with us. So we're really excited that Phyllis has become part of our family. And I'm ready to start if you want to start. I don't know, should I be managing the slides, or are you going to do that, Lene?
Either, whichever is more comfortable for you.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start the slides then. I
Okay.
think I have to start. Share my screen. Okay, and then I also probably need to share the sound. I always forget how to do that.
When you click on share screen, it should give you an option that you can check off to share the audio also.
Let me stop first. Okay, share audio. Okay, share sound too. There we go.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Not sure what that is. Am I sharing?
Yes.
Okay. Oops. Not sure what's happening. Okay. Sorry for the.
There you go.
So again, we are Virginia Interfaith Power Light, and our talk today is focused on the climate change and hunger. And again, thank you for the invitation. We are people of faith collaborating among people of faith and conscience to grow healthy communities by advancing climate and environmental justice. About us, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light is the only organization working with faith communities statewide to mobilize a morality-centered policy response to the climate crisis and to encourage Virginians to practice adaptation and sustainability. We have thousands of active supporters across the state of Virginia and work with more than 200 faith communities. We are a 501c3 organization, started in 2004 and relaunched in 2016 by a group of dedicated steering committee members. We are part of a larger Interfaith Power and Light network of 40 state affiliates and 20,000 congregations working to mobilize a religious response to climate change. There's a few people that we've interviewed, as well as staff members in that picture. Our focus is centered on communities of color, low-income people, and environmental justice communities. These groups are often the most impacted by climate disruption and environmental injustices, like the sites of fossil fuel being cited and chosen and targeted for fossil fuel infrastructure, fracking, oil spills, asthma-inducing pollution, and other environmental hazards. This is a picture of a group of volunteers, and when we were working to resist the pipeline in Buckingham County, and that was the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Our supporters represent people of all walks of life and range of religious and spiritual beliefs. We are an interfaith organization. What they share together and why we come together and work together is that we share a fierce belief in humanity's role in taking care of our planet and taking care of each other. Our supporters represent people of all walks of life and a range of religious and spiritual beliefs. And so there's another picture there of a group of us working together. Here again is another picture. I don't remember what this event was, but it was, I think it was our concert of prayer that we did on behalf of the Buckingham people, people that live in Buckingham and who were resisting pipelines coming through their backyards. And then I want to start with an opening reflection. It's a short clip of a video. It was a conversation that Kendyl and I had with a local activist here in the Richmond area, Duran Chavis, who is we could call him a guerrilla farmer in the sense that he started out his work creating garden beds all across the city. he has now morphed his ministry and his work into an urban farm and an orchard, and just really a beautiful series of gardens and vegetable gardens and orchards around the city. So I want to share a brief clip from a interview we had with
the first signs of structured civilization for human beings. I think whenever we look and see the signs of science, of math, of art, it is all predicated by communities being able to produce food, being able to aggregate food, being able to process food, distribute that food, and have some system of managing the waste from that food. So from my vantage point, food systems are the bedrock around which cities, towns, villages, nations, even governments, countries are built. I found myself at the intersection of food systems and racial equity. Everything that we've done over the last decade or so has been dedicated to building resilient communities through the fostering of healthy food systems that are owned and controlled by communities that have been traditionally locked out of the food system. So what I do now is I farm. I'm a grower. I advocate on behalf of communities, and I work with communities in order to help them have deeper levels of access to healthy food, but not just for the sake of eating, but also for the sake of economics, and also for the sake of holistic health and wellness. That this is not just about growing for the sake of making money. It's about growing for the sake of building and nurturing sustainable communities wherever we find ourselves. Yeah, so this is I'm honored to be able to be here and talk a little bit about that. I think that as far as food systems are concerned, on Earth Day,
so that is by way of reflection, by way of our opening kind of centering moment, to recognize that food systems are actually how we organize ourselves and how we originally organized ourselves as human beings. And to be a human is to be related to and to be connected to food in intimate ways. And in many ways, we've lost quite a bit of that, but we can restore that through the way that we approach our food systems and the way that we approach the work of climate and environmental justice. And so that's what Virginia Interfaith Power Light does on every day. We work to not only related to food, but in other areas, water, transportation, and energy. We're concerned about how all of those intersect to make life, quality of life, better for all people and for the planet. So I'll turn it back.
Thanks, Faith. Because you're already sharing your screen, it would be great if you could just keep advancing the slides.
I'll be happy to.
And can you advance the slide?
the first signs of structure.
So Faith kind of helped out with our opening moment and with our grounding for this presentation. The next section really delves into a framework, just some basic concepts that we can build on later on as we incorporate our thinking around food and hunger into concepts like environmental justice. And so we always like to start kind of with the foundation of what is environmental justice, because I just think that this concept is is really helpful. And one of the best explanations of the concept is a video from Khan Academy. And I really like this because it introduces the language of benefits and burdens. So Faith, you can go on to the next slide. And then just click the video to start.
Where we live in society plays a huge role in the environmental benefits and risks that we're exposed to. And I'm going to actually draw in different parts of society by using this line, which represents the spectrum of society. On the right-hand side, I'm going to draw part of society that experiences higher poverty and also incorporates the often disadvantaged racial minority groups. On the left-hand side, I'm going to draw a much wealthier part of society. One of the things that we know is that living areas that experience high poverty and have a lot of racial minorities often have few environmental benefits compared to the wealthier part of society. What do I mean by environmental benefits? I mean green spaces, parks, recreational areas. What does that look like? Well, let me draw it for you. Using this triangle, this is supposed to represent environmental benefits. And one of the things we can see is that the wealthier part of society has much higher benefits than the high poverty and racial minority part of society. And as I mentioned, those benefits include things like parks, bike paths, and other green spaces. So one part of society seems to be getting a lot of benefit, while another part of society seems to not be getting as much benefit. But what the high poverty and racial minority part of society does get, it does get something. And what it does get, it gets a lot of environmental burden. So what does that look like? And this line is actually supposed to represent increasing burden. So compared to the high income part of society, the high poverty and racial minorities get increasing burden. And this includes things like waste facilities, manufacturing and factories, energy production, and transportation facilities, such as airports. And one of the things we have to consider is that these disadvantaged populations, they are really at risk because they're disadvantaged in many ways. They often have few alternatives in terms of where they work and where they live. They may have little awareness of the risks they may face, being exposed to various environmental risks or pollutants or chemicals. They may also have other pressing issues, meaning that environmental issues are low on their agenda. And let us contrast that to the wealthier population. The wealthier population may very well be more politically powerful. They can also be economically powerful, literally being able to demand that the environmental beneficial facilities are placed close to them and the burdensome facilities are placed far away, and being able to control things like laws and regulations to benefit them more so than the other communities. And they can also be better represented in environmental groups or lobbying groups. Now, this is all of significance when we consider that the high poverty groups and racial minorities may have health problems such as asthma or obesity, because we know conditions like asthma have got strong correlations to environmental issues such as pollutants, particles, ozones, and these are part of the environmental burdens that these populations face. And also when we consider obesity, obesity can be thought of as a lack of access to safe recreational facilities where people can exercise. So a lack of access to environmental benefits and lack of access to affordable grocery and shopping facilities. The big concept here that I want to write down is the concept of environmental justice. And what this concept really looks at is that there is a fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of the environmental benefits and burdens within society across all groups. And as we can see here, that is clearly not happening at the moment, and much action still needs to be taken. Where we
Next
live in
slide.
society plays a huge role in the.
So again, the concept of environmental justice is a really important framework for this discussion today. And again, what I hope you took out of the video is just the language of benefits and burdens. So the slide up on the screen right now is talking about environmental justice. Specifically, it is the EPA's, Environmental Protection Agency's definition of what environmental justice is. The fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation of enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So essentially, when you're thinking of the broader concept, this is the intersection between social justice and environmental quality. And here again, the big goal is to develop an effective framework really to address the damage, risk, and discrimination facing so many communities today, including food access. And then when we're thinking about the concept of environmental justice, it's important to remember, to remind ourselves to be hopeful, that we are hoping that all communities, especially oppressed communities, will find justice so that everyone can experience the benefits of a healthy, sustainable future, and not that the environment be equally polluted and dangerous for all of us. That would not be a good situation. Can you click, Faith? Can you? Oh, great. And so what this shows, the little pop-up bar box on the last slide, that was Virginia's specific definition of environmental justice in the Virginia Code. And so digging a little bit more into what is environmental justice. So the idea that the value that your health, should not suffer because of the environment where you live, work, play, learn, or pray. So fair treatment, what is that? All people, all communities, all races, classes, incomes, and whenever communities lack economic and political power, environmental justice becomes a concern there. And the other portion of the big definition of environmental justice is meaningful involvement. So it's not tokenism, it is making sure that decisions are not already made and that communities are actually brought in. The onus is on the decision makers to reach out. Next slide. I also like to showcase the environmental justice principles when I'm talking about the concept of environmental justice, and also share the EPA definition, because the environmental justice principles, as you can see here, they were written by delegates to the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, which happened back in 1991. So the delegation came together and they created these subs where people that came from environmental justice communities that were facing multiple myriad. We're not going to go through all 17 because we don't have time for that today. But I did pull out 3 principles that I at least like to point out, and then I would encourage all of you to, in your free time later on, to go and check out the EJ environmental justice principles. Next slide.
Kendyl, are you speaking? We can't hear.
Oh, I see here that I'm going in and out. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, so I apologize about that. I turned off my video hoping that it would help with my internet connection. But let me know if you can't hear me again, and then I can try to join via my phone. So these, real quick, these three principles that I wanted to pull out of the 17 are principle 1, 3, and 4. Principle 1, environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth and the interdependence of all species and the right to be free from ecological destruction. Principle 3 mandates the right to ethical, balanced, and responsible uses of land and renewable resources in the interest of a sustainable planet for humans and other living things. And then 4, it calls for universal protection from nuclear testing, extraction, production, and disposal of toxic, hazardous wastes and poisons, and nuclear testing that threaten the fundamental right to clean air, land, water, and food. And so, you know, definitely, it's definitely clear that thinking about food, thinking about hunger, thinking about access to land to be able to grow food, be able to have access to clean water was one of the items that was top of mind for these delegates to that first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And then the next slide. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of bring some attention to today was this wonderful statement. It's from the Unitarian Universalist tradition, but this just really sums up well the connections between environmental justice, food, and hunger. And I won't read all of this, but please feel free to kind of glance over it. I will share a short little snippet on the right here. Access to an adequate supply of healthy food and clean water is a basic human need and right. Many people do not have adequate food while others have a surplus. In many locations, poor distribution of food is a major contributor to hunger and malnutrition. The effects of climate change, weather conditions, and armed conflicts can also expose many people to starvation. Paradoxically, an abundance of food does not guarantee access to healthy food. And with that, I will turn over the presentation to my colleague, Leah, who will be able to connect the concept of environmental justice that we just learned about even more closely with hunger.
Thanks, Kendall. Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Jones. I'm the education coordinator here at Virginia Interfaith Power Light. Like Kendall said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about now the connections between hunger and environmental justice. So as soon as we get to the next slide, I'll share more about the hunger implications when we think about global food security. So according to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, a report they did in 2018, it was the State of Food Security and Nutrition report. They say climate variability and extremes are a key driver behind the recent rise in global hunger. One of the leading causes of severe food crisis and a contributing factor to the alarming levels of malnutrition seen in recent years. So increasing climate variability and extremes linked to climate change are negatively affecting all dimensions of food security and nutrition. Hunger is significantly worse in countries with agri-food systems that are highly sensitive to rainfall and temperature variability and extremes, and where a high proportion of the population depends on agriculture for livelihoods, which we see a lot of the times in rural communities, especially on a global scale. So alarmingly, countries are increasingly exposed to multiple types of climate extremes as the effects of climate change worsen, right? So conflict, climate extremes, and economic downturns critically challenge food systems, either through effects on systems supporting food production, food supply charges, food environments, or consumer behavior, or a combination of any of these, with impacts on food security and nutrition. This is particularly the case where a country's food system is highly vulnerable to the impacts of the drivers and the country has high levels of poverty and inequality, but does not have sufficient support in place to counter that fallout that happens with these negative impacts. So next slide, please. So what we think about now to tackle this, what are some global food security solutions? So also from the new report that the UN FAO released just this year in 2021, the same State of Food Insecurity and Nutrition report, they offer the solution of innovative mechanisms to reduce climate-related risk, widespread adoption of climate-smart and environmentally sound production techniques, and the conservation and rehabilitation of natural environments will ultimately strengthen the resilience of food systems against increased climate variability and extremes. So with that now, I think we can talk more specifically about the hunger implications related to transportation. And for that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Ralph.
Thank you, Leah. I am Ralph Hodge. I'm the Faith Outreach Manager here at Virginia Interfaith Power Light. And I want to connect hunger implications with transportation. High transportation costs and limited transit options are often two of the biggest barriers to food access and accessing foods and opportunities such as jobs and healthcare and education. But the food access is the big deal. What happens when those people, when there are many who are burdened with transportation issues, they have to take multiple buses in the heat of summer to get to the nearest grocery store. And oftentimes, because of redlining, those who depend on public transportation are often in what we call high heat zones. And a place like, say, Richmond, Virginia, who leads the country almost in asthma, having to walk or wait for the bus for long periods of time increases asthma-related health issues. Finding limited options for produce and meats after traveling to a store or food pantry because of the limited access to food. That's a typical thing that we had to go from one bus into another bus into another bus. And then when you get there, they don't have what you need and you have to go to another bus. That's very difficult and that's very hard and taxing. Regularly traveling to multiple charitable food programs to try to piece together meals. And this has become the transportation issue because oftentimes the food pantries are not accessible, or the buses or the public transportation doesn't get to the food pantries or to the grocery stores. But there are some solutions. Next slide, please. Number one, we can create more accessible grocery options. More grocery options can help all residents. This strategy is twofold and includes opening grocery stores in communities without them and expanding transportation infrastructure to reach grocery stores in other communities. And sometimes a great option, a great solution with that is not necessarily opening a big grocery store, but many grocery stores that store and stock the most essential items of fresh meats and fresh produce. Expand transit service. Expanding public transportation hours and lines can accommodate people working second or third shift jobs. People with disabilities or areas with limited socioeconomic resources that need to be connected to denser parts of the city. So just expanding the options is a tremendous way to help with food insecurity. For those who have to work more than one job, getting to those grocery stores on those off hours, having that transportation option is a tremendous help with regards to closing that gap of food insecurity. And then also one thing we're seeing more, and we're seeing this during the COVID time, reduce or eliminate fares altogether. In some cities, they did it for a portion of the COVID, and some cities are still now doing zero fare. And this helps those who are financially burdened because oftentimes they depend on the transportation, to get to work because they have to get to work. But that added expense to use that those transportation dollars to get to grocery stores is a tremendous burden. And now when they don't have to worry about that or can be concerned about that because the fares are free, it allowed them to be able to get to more options with regards to food access. So we wanted just to give you those kind of solutions there. I'll now turn it back over.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm going to now talk about clean water and the hunger implications that relate to clean water. So water availability as climate change, the negative impacts of climate change worsen, excuse me, water availability is becoming less predictable in many places, and increased incidences of flooding threaten to destroy water points and sanitation facilities and contaminate water resources. In some regions, droughts are exacerbating water scarcity and thereby negatively impacting people's health and productivity for the folks that live there. Ensuring that everyone has access to sustainable water and sanitation services is a critical climate change mitigation strategy for years ahead as we continue to see, hopefully not, but as years go by, if we do not tackle the climate crisis and the impacts worsen, clean water and access to clean water will continue to be something that we need to strategize and figure out how to ensure everyone has access to it. So what are some of the challenges that come with that that I've already started speaking to? You can go back to the other slide, Faith. There are higher temperatures and more extreme, less predictable weather conditions, like I already mentioned, which are projected to affect availability and distribution of rainfall, snow melt, river flows, and groundwater, and further deteriorate water quality. This is especially important when we think about low-income communities who are already some of the most vulnerable to any threats to water supply. And those groups are most likely to be affected the worst. With worsening impacts of climate change, we have more floods, more severe droughts, and changes in water availability. I cannot say this today, y'all. I'm so sorry. Changes in water availability will also impact health and food security and have already proven to trigger refugee dynamics and political instability as well. So on to the next slide, just a little bit more about how water access affects nutrition and hunger. So malnutrition is exacerbated by a lack of access to clean water in general. A lack of access to clean water can impede the body's ability to absorb nutrients just on a regular basis. So when we think about extreme drought and extreme flooding, this is something that worsens. So what other things that threaten this access include privatized water sources. We see this happening globally, especially on a larger scale, but we actually also see it happening here in some of our local communities, even in Virginia here. And what this means is that in some cases, we see that people may have access to clean water, however, they may not be able to afford it because private entities have placed water restrictions or made prices high that people are not able to afford clean water. So other ways that hunger is tied to clean water is a clear one, right? We need water to grow our food. Over 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture. And as negative impacts of climate change worsens, we obviously will not be able to use the traditional methods that we have always used to grow our food. These traditional methods are now threatened as access to clean water is worsened. So what are some possible solutions to these threats that I've just shared? I think an easy one, well, considering who you're talking to, would be to make bold investments to update antiquated infrastructure that also poses a huge threat to access to clean water. Many, especially here in the United States, in older cities, older states, there is a lot of older infrastructure that contain old pipes that contain toxins like lead, as well as old sewage infrastructure that can be faulty and also lead to water contamination. So a solution to that would be to change these things, update them, invest the money to put in new pipes and update the sewage infrastructure in older cities. Another solution is to obviously work to reduce our negative impacts of climate change. And as we do that, also maybe begin to invest in new agricultural methods that try to use less water. I know there's already so much being done around this effort, like figuring out creative ways through hydroponics or new agricultural methods to reduce the amount of water that is needed for our crops, especially on a global scale, and as the population continues to grow. So that is another solution to consider. And then lastly, something that we've been fighting for and we feel is a solution is just to fight to make access to clean water a human right, and ensure that folks affected, especially by affordability challenges related to access to clean water, are able to access that, even if they necessarily can't afford it. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it now to Faith or Kendyl to talk more about hunger implications in COVID-19.
Yes, thank you, Leah. So I'm going to be really quick. I found these really great charts in a Politico article, and they just kind of give us a really great overview of the way COVID-19 impacted our food and access to food and hunger. So this first chart demonstrates how grocery spending and government aid went up and how hunger went down in the supply chain as the supply chain struggled. And many of you remember that, especially in the beginning of the height of the pandemic and the shutdown, that there were like empty shelves in grocery stores, and it was really difficult to access certain products and certain food products. And so this chart demonstrates just the way that with the stimulus checks, how food insecurity has been impacted in a positive way, or how it has gone down. So as you can see, the light green line represents families with children. The darker green line represents just people who do not have children necessarily. And you can see that they both were peaking in January with food insecurity, and then as soon as the checks started coming in, there was a severe, in some cases, decline in food insecurity because there was access to money and availability to purchase food where there had not been. I know many of you saw the lines across the country represented by people of all walks of life who were looking for food because if they after losing jobs at massive rates and being shut down, there was just a lower access to food, and food insecurity rose. And then this chart, the second chart, specifically focuses on how the meat packing industry, because of the vulnerability of having so many workers infected with COVID-19, how the pandemic impacted food or access to meat packing. And that still hasn't really balanced itself out. And you can see part of that problem is the concentration of processing and distribution of the meats. You can see that 73% of all beef is packaged by only 4 organizations, 4 companies, JBS, Tyson's, Cargill, and National. You could see that pork has just 3, Smithfield 4 as well, I'm sorry, Smithfield, JBS, Tyson, and Hormel. And then chicken, 54% of all chicken that we eat or have access to comes from these 4, Tyson, JBS, Purdue, and Sanderson. And there you can see JBS is across all three, as well as Tyson. There are good reasons why there was access challenges to meet. And then we have this last chart where another chart showing how government spending actually made it possible for people to have more access to food and actually impacted the food insecurity in a positive way, in the sense that people were able to purchase food and had more purchasing power to buy food and to buy food that was more healthier and better for them. And so this is the critically important aspect of why we need to be concerned about the way that we as a country address the issues related to food insecurity and actually people who are struggling with wealth and struggling or in low income bracket, that instead of targeting them as necessarily burdens on society, that when we are actually able to share and use our moral conscience and our commitment to the common good, that we actually in fact can make big differences in the ability for people to access a high quality of life. And I'll turn it back. And so this is one of the statements that I was going to read. The meatpacking industry is highly concentrated, just recognizing that the availability of certain foods is also shifted because of the COVID-19, and that we have a handful of companies. And one of the things that it's a Catholic actual doctrine, but it's called, oh gosh, it just jumped out of my head. But what it has to do with is making more subsidiary, it's called. And the idea there is that the more concentrated local access to different products and resources is better for the community, but it also is better actually for the environment as a whole, because then we're not adding to the processes of transporting mass production and all of the ways that actually have impacted the environment in a negative way. But that if we're doing smaller local farms, smaller local access is actually better for the environment, but it's also better for the distribution and supply chain.
All right, I'll take it from here and I'll wrap us up. Some resources and next steps. As you can tell, Virginia Interfaith Power Light, our organization covers a wide range of things affecting the environment and the connection to hunger, as in particular with regards to this presentation. But if you could advance the slides, we can just let you know some access. One simple way that you can get a lot of resources is just to visit our website. We have all sorts of things, sermon starters, prayers, resources for Earth Day. We the link to our Friday afternoon show that is highly informative that we broadcast on social media every Friday, excuse me. And so a film and video library, resources in various languages and that can connect to all faiths. And so we encourage you to join that page or visit that page often. And I'll go to advance the next slide, please. And you can always donate to Virginia Interfaith Power Light. If you go to our website, there's a donate button that you can see, and we would appreciate that. You can volunteer. There's always various volunteer opportunities. Organize an environmental justice town hall in your community. Write a letter to the editor. We're big on that, especially you want you to write and contact your legislator. But I've got a few more ways you can get involved. I want to highlight. If you advance the next slide. Become a partner with VAIPL. That's a great way to get involved. By becoming a VAIPL partner, congregation, or community, you will be connected to a supportive statewide network of Virginians of many backgrounds and faiths seeking to care for creation. Your congregational faith community will have access to the latest news, information, opportunities, and programs from VAIPL. And this one that we push, take the Faith Climate Justice Voter Pledge. That's a link on our webpage. That it's just a pledge that you're going to be committed to voting in a way that leads to a more sustainable environment. And then join us for Climate in the Pulpits 2021. This year, we're talking about the kinship of creation and how we're all connected with creation. And it's a great way to implement the environmental justice issues into the discussion at your local faith community. And at that moment, I will turn it back over to Kendyl to close us out.
Thank you. That concludes our presentation for today. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. I joined via my phone, and I guess I will open Q&A, and if any folks would like to share comments or questions.
Again, do we have anybody who has comments or questions?
This is Chuck Hayes, and I have a question. Well, comment first. Enjoyed the presentation, learned a lot, and you're doing a lot more in the sense of many different issues. But that brought me to a question: how do you decide, or do you need to decide, which particular issues to focus on and how to identify those? Because you have so many possibilities there that, and particularly to do the last three things that were presented to us about how to get involved personally.
So I think, and then Faith, feel free to join in too. But of course, our work is motivated from our mission and our vision. So we really see, what we imagine when we look to the future is overcoming the climate crisis, eradicating environmental and social injustices, and living in a just, thriving, and equitable world. That's a big vision. And so right now, how we're working our way towards that vision, we have spotlighted, we've chosen 3 campaigns. The first of that is our longest running campaign, which focuses on energy justice. Our second one focuses on water justice. And our third focuses on transit justice. That's not to say that we don't provide resources or spotlight different issues, but those are our 3 main campaigns at this time. And the majority of our work in the past couple of years around food has been providing resources. So we have a food and faith quick guide. We also, over the past, I guess about 6 months or so, have been doing a number of garden blessings across the Commonwealth, with a lot of different faith communities. But anyway, long story short, we have to narrow down our focuses on especially the work that we're doing on in terms of policy work at the General Assembly and our major campaigns. And so I gave you those 3 areas. And Faith, I don't know if you want to add anything to that question.
Well, I actually wanted to add to Sandy Hagman. I had a question. She asked, so do you anticipate that hunger will increase again now that some government programs are ending? And I would argue that yes, there probably is going to be an increase. But the one thing that is, we have a couple of things that are, I guess, positive that are will continue for a time. And that is that the $300 tax credit for families with children will continue for some time. And there are moves in Congress right now to try to make that permanent. And that will make a big difference if families are able to benefit from their taxes on the front end, right? Instead of, because really basically it's about benefiting from tax credits on the front end rather than waiting till January to file your taxes. And then so that's one thing. And then the second is, we have right now the conversation about infrastructure that's going on in our Congress, where we have a bill that's coming out that has made it through the House and is, making its way through the Senate, and they will be returning at the end of this month. And so we're hoping that in that bill that some of these infrastructure needs the monies and the support that's necessary for, as Leah discussed, for water infrastructure, for the water systems especially for older cities and communities who have not had access to water for some time because of their infrastructure challenges, will be able to benefit from funding, more funding. And so one of the reasons why it's so important for communities like yourselves to be aware and involved and to be concerned about not just not just participating on voting day for people, for legislators who keep climate at the forefront, but also participating in the advocacy process. So during General Assembly, throughout the year, encouraging our legislators to make good investments in communities and to actually spend the dollars where they're needed for in communities that have been either neglected or overburdened. So this is why all of these issues that we talked about today intersect, and why transportation, water, and energy all really impact, all impacted and have an impact on food and insecurity and food justice as well.
Well, we do thank you all. There's a couple messages from Kendyl to link to take the voter pledge and to sign up for the email list. So you can see that in the chat function. We do have try to keep our sessions to an hour. So we do want to close unless there's another pressing question or comment. Our next session of the Virginia ELCA Hunger Committee concerns how to advocate effectively with government officials. We're pleased that Virginia State Senator John Edwards would join us to talk about how to best present your opinions and concerns to your government officials. Senator Edwards represents 21st District, which is around the Roanoke area, and serves on the Courts of Justice, Privileges, and Elections in the Transportation Committees. This session will be Thursday, October the 14th, again from 12 to 1. It will be on Zoom. There is no cost to attend. However, registration is required, and Lene will be sending out email notices later for that session. Again, we want to thank Faith and Kendyl and Leah and Ralph for sharing how to effectively advocate for the hungry. And again, we thank you so much for your presentation. If we can ask Phyllis to lead us in closing prayer.
Let us pray. God of creation, keep us ever mindful of the needs of others, our neighbors near and far. Amen.
Thank you.
Again, we thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice to see the big turnout, and hope to see you on October the 14th.
Thank you again. Appreciated it.
Thanks again.
Thank you for having us.